Aloha, everybody, and welcome to Tiki Tuesday Talks. Stoked to be here for another edition. We got a really interesting conversation ahead, so let's bring the crew on. Hi, guys. Brian, tell us where you're calling in from.
Hey, I'm Brian Evans, and I'm calling in from Brooklyn, New York. I run Sunday in Brooklyn and Rule of Thirds bar programs.
Awesome. So rad. Claire.
Hello. I am sitting in what was the dining room of my little bar and restaurant here in Brooklyn, New York, and is now slowly turning into a retail space. But our place is called Hunky Dory here. I'm the owner, and then I also have a platform talking about sustainability in bars and restaurants called Outlook Good.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Steva.
Hi. I'm in Birmingham.
Lovely. The plant's in a different spot today. You're changing it up.
Well, we're always together. That's the important thing. George and I are always together, so that's all that matters. He's got a new leaf. It's very nice.
Oh, wow. All right. The evolution. We should do like a phased thing, you know?
Oh, yeah. He's going to get to like a giant.
That'll be awesome. Aaron, how's Baltimore? You're muted, so we don't know.
Awesome.
There he is. Anything else to add?
No, I'm very excited for this talk. Very excited.
All right, perfect. Love it. All right, guys, we'll circle back with you shortly. Let's move this thing along. So, Claire is going to be speaking all hands on deck why Tiki must get green. As she mentioned, owner, bartender, Hunky Dory, founder of Outlook Good. Look forward to hearing more about that. As usual, chat box and questions if you're in Crowdcast. Please feel free to ask questions as well with Facebook Live. Also, stoked for you guys to share the event. Tip jar is Venmo at Hunky Dory BK. Always appreciate it if you guys can donate. Presentation 30 to 40 minutes, cocktail session for 10, and then 5 questions with the Tiki fam with Brian. So Claire, a little background. Claire has bartended, managed, and consulted some of the country's most well-known and awarded cocktail institutions, from Houston to SF and now New York. She's worked vigorously against issues of sustainability within the industry. Her past work with Tin Roof Drink Community was honored with the industry's first ever Sustainable Spirit Award and the 2017 Golden Spirit Educator Award presented at Tales of the Cocktail. Most recently, she opened an awesome spot, Hunky Dory in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. It's landed many accolades, including being named on several Best of New York lists. And then she's going to get into a bit on Outlook Good, a consulting and educational company focused on her goal of creating a culture of shared information and inclusivity centered around greener bar practices. So with that, we'll hand it over here.
I get it. It's me. Great. Thank
There it
you.
is. Yeah, that's you.
I like went back and forth on a few names to make this topic sound like more fun, and wanted to add lots of like fun imagery to it. But to be honest, I'm not going to pretend that this is the most fun conversation to have within cocktails. But that being said, I think it's all things worth considering. So that's me. I want to make sure I have the right. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to talk a little bit about the intersection of sustainability and Tiki. And I hope that you all are seeing my screen. Yeah. So sustainability is like one of those really loaded words, loaded topics, especially when you think of it used in terms of an industry that's all buzzwords. So I just kind of wanted to break down like what I think, or several people think about when they think about sustainability. These are two images that are used in academic circles to talk about the way that sustainability interacts with different cultures and economics and people, of course, because we're a big part of that. On figure one, it is, you kind of see sustainability in the center of this overlapping Venn diagram, and that's kind of like viewing sustainability as a balancing act between equity, economy, and the environment. But for myself, I think more along the lines of the second figure, which is the nested systems view of sustainability. And that more or less is like summed up by this idea that the environment is the containing system that we and all the systems that we're a part of and that we interact belong to. Societies and cultures exist within that. And then the economic structures that we involve ourselves with are products of those societies and our interactions with the environment. When I think about sustainability, I always try to think of these foundational concepts that I pulled from a very dorky book about teaching about sustainability in terms of social justice. And using these foundational concepts are things that is a lens that I always bring all of my decisions and choices back to, and making sure that everything I'm doing kind of is in reflection of these ideas. And I just wanted to touch on a few of them because I think in particular that they are really prevalent in the idea of Tiki itself, which is a beautiful, usually results in these beautiful experiences and beautiful drinks. So I wanted to mention and define a few of them. So we have beauty, which is this quality that enhances life and contributes to well-being, which I think that we, as I just mentioned, can all, subscribe to as part of a big part of the Tiki experience. Is this very like visual experience that we have when we're drinking and then partaking in it. Community, humans are part of the ecological, cultural, and social communities. Ethics, and I wanted to highlight this specifically, but we define ethics in this way as serving to guide human endeavors, and it's not just a topic for philosophy. So ethics in terms of real intentions that are followed by actions that back that up. And then systems. A system is an interdependent set of elements that form a complex whole. And I think that one's really important because we're going to talk about how all these things kind of piece together to form not just Tiki, but interact with all the different economies and cultures and people and land that ultimately come together into our cocktail glass. So I just wanted to kind of address the fact that, people are always like, oh, why are we talking about this? Let's talk about rum. Let's talk about who has the best coconut cream recipe. And that's really cool. But, I mentioned fun. I think I said fun like 20 times in the beginning. But I think that even calling myself out, that there is this idea that, tiki's supposed to be fun, cocktails are supposed to be fun, bartending's supposed to be fun, sustainability is not fun. And what I think that line of thinking does is frame like, it presents this false dichotomy, like you have to choose between the two. For myself, we at Hunky Dory do a lot of cocktails here that center sustainability, and I think that they're all very fun and whimsical, and it's built into the name of our business, Hunky Dory, and everything we do here. Sustainability is the underlying value, so it actually adds value to, our all these like fun little things that we do that makes people like our place so much. And I also wanted to consider that fun in itself has a question of equity embedded in it, that there is definitely a discussion that who has access to this fun that we are supposedly having when we're enjoying tiki, and who doesn't. And then just to consider what type of fun are we having that does not consider people having their basic needs and rights met.
I think 100% sustainability can be fun.
Thank you. Thank you for that validation. So we need, let's see. We need tiki to escape. So this is another like really big, I don't want to say excuse, but maybe another reasoning why we don't want to think critically about tiki in terms of sustainability. So when we think of the idea of escapism, there is like obviously some things that are like kind of problematic within that. Ultimately, escapism refers to escaping, life's problems, and it kind of legitimizes the responsibility of the real world's problems, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there is, we still need to make sure that we're not losing sight of some really important things along the road. So it's not about absolving oneself of accountability or, rushing into that necessarily either, even though I personally believe that you should, but it's about this balancing act. And I think one really important thing here is when we talk about escapism in tiki, we have to think about the places that we're escaping to, and the lands and the people that are part of this culture of tiki are often the people that are most negatively impacted by climate change around the world. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, like consider, where do the people in these places get to escape to as waters rise and land is compromised as climate change moves forward. Also, this is not going to be a talk about does climate change exist or doesn't it, just so you're aware. You're in the wrong room. And then I think this is a big conversation, and it's funny because I was reading some articles that Kelsey and Ian had posted in reference to trash tiki and their shift to not using the word tiki. And there were some articles that were several years old, and some that myself and my business partner, Chad, were referencing too, and how people had, thought about this idea of colonialism in sustainability as like something that the tiki world had already come to terms with several years ago. And so I think that's a very specific viewpoint. But specifically, I think that it's, obviously something that we all need to be really critical about in terms of any type of engagement with capitalism and products and things like that. But specifically in tiki, and this talk is mostly focused on the ways that climate change intersects with the centering of whiteness as we engage with tiki. So these are some kind of concepts that I wanted to just highlight and flag for people that were tuning in. and why we're like bringing this into the conversation, because they all go hand in hand. And it's oftentimes thought about like, oh, let's silos climate change and not talk about social justice or climate justice or all these other human factors, when the truth is they all have to go hand in hand. So I'm going to run through them. Colonialism deprives people and places of value. It dehumanizes the supply chain. So not acknowledging all these different factors, especially when a big topic here is going to be agriculture. Tiki is agriculture, and ultimately agriculture is land and people. And to think about how we're interacting with them. Who does and does not profit money and power from Tiki? Whose perspective are we prioritizing when we talk about Tiki? And when we ignore these conversations, when we think about Tiki, or when we center whiteness in Tiki, it ignores that the people and cultures that we are idealizing are ultimately the people and cultures that hold many of the solutions that we need to fight climate change. And that could be their focus on community, folk knowledge, or traditions that are passed down generationally. But these are, these are the people that have been stewards of their land and our land long before we got here. And when we ignore or disregard and not center their presence in it, we're really not acknowledging that they have so much to offer in terms of contributing to this conversation.
Totally. But by the way, if anybody's interested, we hosted Mariah Kunkel, who has a project she calls Specifica Project, where we delved into a lot of that component of how do we look at colonialism with regard to Tiki, where do we go from here? So we're looking forward to like continuing to host that conversation. I think we'll probably have a follow-up coming up in the next couple of months as well. Which is really useful for people like us who are celebrating it but want to do it appropriately, want to respect the tradition, want to understand what is inappropriate, what is appropriate, how do we support those voices in that kind of element.
Absolutely. And one on this slide particular, it's kind of doubling down on all of that as well. And there's one term here that I think really links that idea of colonialism and centering whiteness and sustainability, and that's the term extractive. When you have purely extractive relationships with certain cultures, peoples, and land, what do we call that? And I think that is, ultimately, like, we need to think about like what we are extracting, how we're extracting it, and then also what we're giving back to these cultures as well.
Yeah. I mean, extractive as an idea is essentially the premise of colonialism, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
That was the answer to the question.
I got it.
So this was a quote from a writer who wrote for an article for Punch Drink a few years ago called The Paradise Paradox, that actually talked about all of these things in terms of sustainability and Tiki, trying to understand if sustainability is a trend in cocktails. It's been the focus of my work for the last 8 years, so I don't know what constitutes a trend at that point, but it's definitely something that is slow to work its way into the fabrics of our bars. And but more and more I get more and more every day I get more people interested in it, and you can see like these little pieces of momentum happening, whether it's something as low-hanging fruit like straws, or it's something like thinking about where their rum is coming from. And I think this was a great quote, because it's, this Tiki is not responsible for these grave consequences, but it's neither exempt from them. Mm-hmm. And if we're selling an idealized version of paradise, inappropriate while actual paradise, is that inappropriate while actual paradise disappears? And so that's kind of like the underlying message behind this talk, and really behind everything I do when I think about cocktails. So
quick question before we go on.
Yeah.
I'm curious about those conversations. So where are they coming from? Is it people at the bar, what's kind of the breakdown of like the conversations about either products or, you know, sustainability in cocktailing or whatever? Like, give us a little more on that. I'd love to hear a little more about what you're experiencing.
Are you talking about like when we interact with guests, or?
Yeah, is that what you're referring to?
I think that
like industry people reaching out for insights from you.
Both. So we definitely lots of bartenders, definitely media, and even here at our bar, you know, we've made a big point to, we're kind of transparent in all of our operations. And that's just like our MO. And so we talk about a lot of things that probably would make certain restaurant institutions shudder. But we don't really keep up too much of that illusion of things aren't fucked up. And so when people are like, how's it going in the pandemic? I'm like, it's not great. All my friends are out of work and they're losing their jobs. And so we've always been like, try to be really transparent. But at the same time, we don't want people to walk in our bar and like feel like they're hit over the head with this message of sustainability. So we have like these little cues, these little messages built into our menus, built into the materials that we use, that I think reinforces those ideas. And I always use this example of there's nothing worse when you go into a bar and you're like, oh, I want a rye whiskey. And then all of a sudden the bartender is giving you a 30-minute history of prohibition and and explaining to you the difference between all these mashes, and you're like, I just want a rye whiskey. And so, you know, that kind of geeky bartender trope is, I think, built on the idea of some bartenders focus more on, lacking the social IQ to understand like how much a guest wants to engage in this. And so that's something that I really try to emphasize with our staff here, is that not everybody wants to come here and talk about carbon footprint. You know, some people are on Tinder dates. Some people want to read their book. Some people don't share those politics with us. And, or some people might want to know, but they don't want to like walk straight into that conversation. You kind of need to be gentle with them. And that's such a big part of bartending, right? And is, kind of gauging those interactions with your guests. And so we have these little cues, like the straws that we use. I can't have ice on my teeth, and it really bothers me, so I'm a big straw user. But we use like canes, these straws made from reed, sourced from Southeast Asia, sustainably sourced from Southeast Asia. We use straws made from agave fibers, bagasse, that are left over from tequila production. We'll have an ingredient in a cocktail that you'll see later that says sunflower seeds, and people are like, oh, what does that mean? And or we'll label something like, behind me I have this turmeric, and the company's called Diaspora Co., and they're a company I reference a lot because I think it's such a great example. And we actually list the brand, even though we don't list many brands on our menus. And people always ask questions. So we drop these little hints everywhere to get people to engage with it. And, you know, bartenders are always, especially cocktail bartenders, are always seen as like the gateway to, or the trendsetters for a lot of drinking culture. And if you think that stops with just like what's in your glass, then, you're obviously like, you're not giving yourself enough credit. Like, people are picking up on all these cues that we are doing. And that's how like fair trade coffee got started. And that's how ultimately the straw movement is something that has been, I think, pretty universally at this point, is starting to really like be addressed in a lot of different cities around the country.
That was amazing how that took fire. And I could see it from traveling all over to different markets, and just the conversation was like overnight was everywhere. And it was
exactly
really cool to see that. So
exactly.
So basically what you're saying is there's ways to engage from a menu perspective and dig in that's not necessarily like told to people out of the gate, but there's opportunities to kind of dig in if you so desire, but maybe not. Is that kind of how you do it?
Yeah, and I think that is, again, I don't want people to walk in and be like, "Welcome to Claire's Sustainability Funhouse." That's not our thing.
You got a new name already. Hunky-dory's out. Sustainability Funhouse in.
But there's definitely again, our guests are smart and they're picking up on all these little things, and they want to know why we use this in a dish, and they want to know why we list our farms on our menus. They want to know why we're using this straw instead of a plastic straw. And even now, I don't even have to say things because we're serving drinks out a window onto the street. And I'll always ask people, I'm like, do you want a straw? And they're like, well, what is it made of? They're like quizzing me on it. Like, and I'm like, look, I know.
Look, I have the Sustainability Funhouse. All right.
Yeah. They're starting to steward the conversation too. So I think talking about these things is really important so that we don't get left behind as well.
I really like that approach. I mean, not just about sustainability, but many pieces of allowing for people to dig in and get information, but not being like served it up immediately, like you have to digest it. And I think, especially for people who are running bars and restaurants in other parts of the country that maybe aren't as progressive as Franklin Ave and Crown Heights, it's probably a really cool way to invite the conversation, but not force the conversation out of the gate, and potentially risk alienating somebody who needs to be moved slowly through that process, right? As
Absolutely.
Hit over the head with it.
Absolutely. I am going to hit you over the head with it in the next few slides, though.
I'm here. Hit us hard. Hit us hard.
So I just wanted to, so now that kind of establishing that groundwork of what I am talking about when I talk about sustainability today, and the framework within that I'm doing that in, I wanted to just target a few small things so that we can consider them, and we'll dig into one in particular and then maybe touch on a few, so that you kind of get an idea of the ways that we are curious and inquisitive and critical of the elements that come together that make up Tiki. So these, I just outline a few that are some more visual, obvious things when you think of Tiki. So I think it's really interesting that the rise of Tiki in itself is kind of coincides a lot with the rise of plastic. And I kind of broke down this really, what I think is, I have a very different idea of what I think is interesting, but the rise of plastic in the United States, or in our world in general. So in the 1920s, 30s, you have kind of the boom of plastic because we have this oil industry that's producing oil, and they're realizing that they have these two outputs, these two byproducts of making oil called ethylene and propylene. And they ultimately joined forces with the petrochemical industry to turn those into our two most used plastics today. So polyethylene is made from ethylene, and it's what we use in most packaging. And propylene is what you see in or polypropylene is what you see in yogurt cups, diapers, microwave dishes. In 1941 is what they really call the dawn of the plastic age, and that's right around after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and there's just a shortage of rubber and steel and things like that. And so the U.S. government, whoever was in charge of purchasing for the U.S. military, decided what we can turn into plastic, we're going to turn into plastic, and kind of created this huge need and this huge industry from that. And then in 1946 is when a very smart man invented or fine-tuned plastic injection molding. And what that means is if you think of a swizzle stick with the name of a bar embedded into it, that is plastic injection molding. And that's really what made plastic take off in our homes and in our bars and our restaurants as well. I've read I'm always scared to put out Tiki facts to Tiki people because they usually know way more than I do. But I read through several articles that Harry Yee is ultimately seen as one of the forefront bartenders using a lot of garnishes, and he popularized the drink umbrella and the orchid and some other like plastic accoutrements. And but at that time, there were a lot of people already starting to use these use plastic in their cocktails as like kind of flashy and branding opportunities. And in 1960, the average person is consuming about 30 pounds of plastic products per year. And I want to say, and I cut this off at the end, but the last number is in 2018, and we use about 300 pounds of plastic a year. So about 10 times that amount in the last 60 years. And then a few other little dates to flag is in 1960 is really the first, is noted as one of the first times that plastic replicas of tikis, of the high tikis, I believe I'm saying that right, is made, which were usually made out of stone, are made, and they're given to Air New Zealand flyers. And I think it was like something like over 200,000 were given out in 1 year. So you start to see like these plastic souvenirs work their way into South Pacific cultures. And then Spirit is the company that really ultimately trademarked the swizzle stick, or what we think of as a swizzle stick today. And in the late 60s, their sales surpassed 1 million. And in 1979, the TWA purchased over 20 million plastic drink stirrers. So that's kind of like that, I think, like a very fast progression of us going from not using anything to consume beverages to introducing this plastic piece into our cocktails, but specifically into travel, drinking associated with travel, and drinking associated with tiki. So today, where is most of our plastic made today? Most of our plastic today is made in China. Where does this plastic go? Per capita consumption in Asia, Africa, and India is only 1/3 of the United States. So United States leads the world in plastic consumption being imported into our country. As I mentioned, who makes this plastic? And most of it is coming from China. And I kind of zeroed in on this area in China that's specific to plastic injection molding, because that's kind of what we're talking about right now. So whether it's toys or kitchen goods, and though I'm not 100% sure if it would include something like a swizzle stick, but it's where most of the plastic injection molding is centered in China. The living wage there, defined in 2015, was $398. And while the typical plastic factory worker was making $175 per month for a 60-hour work week. And I think that's something to consider when we talk about sustainability, not just in terms of like where our plastic is coming, but who is making it. Because again, we're talking about these nested elements of environment and society, which is made of people. And we want to always think about the sustainability of the people that work within these systems. So I think it's really interesting to think about the fact that these people are being paid so little to make these things that are ultimately undervalued in our society. And that's what usually holds that pricing so low, and they're paid so low. A lot of the swizzle stick companies that I looked at online in like first searches A few of them are based in the United States. And after doing some digging and like looking up job websites and like job review sites and things like that, these are some of, most of the people working in these factories are working minimum wage, they're working overtime. Some of them aren't getting benefits. And a lot of one of the bigger plastic swizzle companies actually are in the United States, who I won't say here, is they do a lot of contracting through Department of Corrections. So I know that we are talking a lot right now about what does dismantling certain institutions look like? Well, it also means defunding organizations that partake in that profit and partake in these systems as well. So that's something to consider. And that like literally took me an hour to Google and do some research in 3 days ago. And so
yeah, that's new for me. It's interesting.
And I know that that's like, whoa, and that's heavy, and but those are things to consider. And when we talk about like, who cares if we're just using this swizzle stick? I think that, again, it all comes down to the resources, the limited resources we're using, which are coming from the earth, and then the people that are making them, and then the systems that feeds into. So I think those are all things to really consider. And
no
again,
way that you could achieve the same objective without using that, right? Like, do you need a throwaway or takeaway plastic swizzle stick per se?
Exactly. I mean, we've used things made from bamboo, or ultimately we try to work out most single-use items out of our shop, or we did pre-COVID. But right now we actually, to be transparent, we use all we use all eco products, and we use all single-use plates and glasses, which kind of hurts my soul in a lot of ways, but it's also something that it was a hard decision to make, but it felt like the right decision to make to prioritize our staff safety, and not bring those things back to dirty cups and dirty plates back to the dishwasher. But it's all give and a take, and it's ultimately how much time, when you're looking to source these ingredients, how much time you want to dig into them, or what kind of questions we need to ask. And I think when you, all of this is about question asking, and we're the people driving down the prices because we demand to pay so little for certain items, especially certain items that people look at and then throw in the garbage right afterwards. And then we're the people that, need to set the standards for these companies as well. So all very heavy things to consider. Let's see here. I think I put up the wrong presentation actually, so this should be interesting. But I wanted to jump into a few other things because I know I have limited time. But I guess I'll say, like, who deals with plastic waste? I could go on and on about the end of the downstream perspective of being sustainable, and thinking about like how does recycling work in your city? Does it work in your city? It often doesn't work in most cities, but that is usually, unfortunately, left to the due diligence of the user at the end of the day. So it's part of our jobs to kind of help reinforce these very flawed, not transparent systems to make sure that we're trying to get our plastics and our disposables to the right places. So I'm going to jump into flowers, which I think is kind of touches on the cocktail you'll see a little bit later. But I used to, when we first started talking about sustainability and cocktails, we always had referenced this one picture of this like really shitty looking Mai Tai, that had like this big orchid and all this plastic stuff on it. And but I think about that orchid a lot. And so I did a lot of research on orchids and flowers and things like that. And the flower industry, this quote in particular is drawn from a paper that was written, and it focused on the sourcing of three global industries, and that was flowers, diamonds, and gold. And we're all like very familiar with talking about things like blood diamonds and the nasty industry of sourcing gold and the countries and colonialism that is embedded in, and the countries it exploits. And I thought it was really interesting that flowers were lumped into that too, because it's something that we don't really think of, like this beautiful earth-grown thing being part of a very exploitive, toxic system. But unfortunately, it is. And flowers are tough to kind of talk about because they are, you kind of think that they're grown down the street, but most of the United States flowers are grown outside of our country. And a lot of those, well, I'll say first of all that flowers are some of the most pesticide intensive crops, and pesticides are responsible for most of the carbon footprint that the agricultural industry puts out into the world. We talk about how agriculture is like the main culprit, one of the main culprits for climate change. We're talking about pesticides. We're talking about the chemical runoff that damages water and kills ecosystems in water. We're talking about how that water abuse, the pesticide and chemical runoff into that water also affects the water that we drink, which are all limited resources. Flower industry is not free, like most industries, of labor abuses, including the exposure of most of these people to these very toxic environments. And when we think about where we're sourcing these flowers, like outside of especially tropical flowers, we're talking about places like Malaysia and the Philippines and Thailand specifically. Keep trying to swipe on my laptop, but it doesn't work that way. And I definitely uploaded the wrong slides on here, so I'm
you
sorry.
Want to switch it? You can switch it. I have some questions for you if you want to switch it out.
I think it's okay. It's
okay.
But I just wanted to show I didn't update the presentation. I just wanted to show, like, this is most of our orchids, the orchid that you would specifically think of sitting on top of a tiki drink, comes from Thailand. And they use a lot of those in Thailand, but they also, because they're kind of representative of like Thailand tourism, but most of them is exported outside of Thailand, and a lot of them go to the United States. And for the most part, when I did that research, a lot of them went to the restaurant and hospitality industry specifically. So think about like hotel displays and food. A lot of them are used in food in particular. And most of these farms that we're sourcing these flowers from are small family-owned farms, and they are subject to the same kind of pricing that we demand from those flower markets as well. So again, it's something when you think about putting a flower on a cocktail, and oftentimes it doesn't get eaten. I've never seen anybody eat an orchid, even though they're edible, but I find that they often go into the garbage. And so obviously there's something that we are always pushing the price down. But they have lots of other problems. And as you can see, since most of them are being exported, the big thing for these flowers is that they are part of what we call a cold chain. And that means that it's part of a series of refrigerated facilities on farms, on planes and boats that they have to be in order to get to us fresh, because they have such like small shelf life. And so all of these refrigerated trucks, these refrigerated boats, these refrigerated airplanes, especially right now when there's less commercial airplane flights, is they're basically loading up these flowers on flights that are half empty, and so it actually raises their carbon footprint as well. And I'm sorry, all my slides are fucked up, but I wanted to just also show there was a group in Europe that started an organization called Fairflowers, Fair Plants, and they wanted to put 10 points together that we should all be thinking about that when we think about the flowers that we source, and to think about them critically. And as you can tell with the 6 that are showing here, that a lot of those have to do with not just the land, but also the people that work for that land, and the people that sell them into these flowers into our markets. And so again, we're not talking about sustainability of like a piece of agricultural property. We're talking about the sustainability of the people that work there. And so this is why these conversations to me are highly important.
Got it. We also had a comment here. One of the alternatives that was mentioned is using, and I'm going to maybe mispronounce this, but nasturtium blossoms to garnish.
Nasturtium blossoms are delicious.
Nasturtium, yeah. And so Ella grows them in Northern California, and so that's her solution of doing that. So maybe some ideas depending on where you live and what you might be able to find.
Yeah, I've used nasturtium. Actually, I used to live in Texas. I lived in San Francisco, and now I live in New York. All 3 very different climates, and all 3 I've had nasturtium growing near me. And they're like these beautiful orange, yellow, pink flowers that range in colors, but they're also edible. And the nice thing about them is their stems are edible too. And their stems have a very different flavor, but they're very peppery. And so you can use all parts of the plant, and they regenerate very quickly. And, you know, another, like one other building on that, upon that, like one other solution we do is we work with our community garden here. So when they have things like chocolate mint or nasturtium or tomatillos, I don't know why they're growing tomatillos, but because there's not a lot of demand for them in our local food system. But we end up taking those and using them in cocktails, and they're local to us. We can literally clip them the day of and bring them to the restaurant, and we end up donating up like 25 to 50 cents from each drink back to the community garden and help support this hub for food security in our neighborhood. So I love that idea of like thinking about what's beautiful and what's local to you in terms of aesthetic for your cocktails.
Cool.
I really messed up these slides, but I'm just gonna keep going. So 2 of the other things I wanted to talk about really quickly were coconuts, which I think are really interesting. Everybody should kind of look at these articles here, which I had very nice visuals with at one point, but they you know, obviously coconuts are another big ingredient that we think about when we think about Tiki. Most of those, I think it's like over 60% of our coconuts actually come from the Philippines. So it's a topic specifically close to my heart because my family's Filipino. And there's, you know, there's good and bad things about coconuts. They don't really need a lot of pesticides. Because they are naturally like very durable to the climates they're being grown in. But at the same time, a lot of the workers being in those industries are paid very little, and then processing those coconuts into goods that we would use in drinks or food has a pretty high carbon footprint. And there's also the travel involved with the coconuts. That is something to consider. Mm-hmm. And then almonds are a big one, which is, yeah, there we go. Almonds is something I've kind of like always talked a lot about, which is, I'm skipping ahead here. There, coconuts. Almonds is another big ingredient that I always talk about in cocktails, and I highlight that in the recipe that I use for the demo. But most of the country's almonds are grown in the U.S. and most of the country's almonds are grown in California, and California is always in this kind of state of drought, and almonds use a shit ton of water. And so when I was doing this research, particularly for this talk, I was thinking a lot about the different substitutions we could use for almonds, because not only are almonds very water intensive, but they also require lots of pesticides, and I've already ranted about how bad those are. But because they're also using so many pesticides, they're also killing off a lot of the bees and bats in California, which are really have these like really horrible ripple effects in California's biodiversity and the ecosystem that we're a part of there. So almonds are like pretty bad on all levels. But I did, when I was doing this research, I use sunflower seeds, which I'll talk about in a second, but as my almond replacement. But I thought it was really interesting that the original almond recipes started with barley, and then eventually included almonds into it, and then eventually more or less worked barley out of it. And barley was actually is a very drought resistant crop. And I think it's really interesting that we took this thing that was like fairly sustainable in itself and like shifted it towards this product that is completely not. So when people like to argue with me about how my sunflower seed orgeat is not historically correct, I also like to just point out that almonds were not necessarily used in the first orgeats either, and that maybe we should think back to what people had easy access to when we didn't have an overabundance of pesticides and things like that. I'm not going to talk that much about cane spirits because I feel like that is a very obvious topic that I would like to think that people are considering when they talk about sustainability and spirits. But, again, it's not like, what proof does this come off distill at? What is it a wild fermentation? Like, think about building in some of these questions that we have talked about as we looked at other ingredients in our cocktails, and building that into what you ask your distributors, what you ask these brand ambassadors, when you're asking them about the bottle that they're trying to sell you that day.
And then you should have that. That's really generous. And
then I just want to end my long rant about circling back to like when we talk about Tiki as escapism and Tiki, who are the people benefiting from the power of and money that is generated from Tiki, and who is at the other end of that spectrum. Those are typically the cultures and people and land that are going to be most affected by climate change. And this is a really great report. I can send everybody the resources for these, but from Vision of Humanity, and it's talks about who is in the highest risk for climate change and singular events, and also ongoing risks from climate change. And it's Asia Pacific, South Asia are like the two groups that are most at risk. And those are the two groups that we ultimately are trying to honor or reference when we think about Tiki. And I think that this highlights perfectly how we can't keep these conversations separate anymore. We can't pretend that, these idealized places we escape to are going to be around forever if we don't try to make singular individual choices. And I know that people always are like, nobody, my not using a plastic straw is not going to, help the rising waters and things like that. But as we solve the straws, these are individual actions that, especially as people of like decision makers and kind of gatekeepers to what's cool in our communities, they ultimately add up to large scale collective actions. And on top of that, This critical thinking is also meant to, I could do a whole other presentation on this, start thinking about like what these decisions look like in terms of real-time political happenings in your community. So I guarantee you that there are votes on plastic bags. There are votes on where subsidies are going in terms of, are they going to pesticide-heavy agricultural industries, or are they going to farmers trying to go organic? Are they going to, there's all these things happening. And so it's not just about your purchasing, but it's about what you're participating in as well. It's
even at a local level with regard to like regulations and things like that. Yeah, it's a really good point. Cool.
That's it.
I have a few questions from the crowd here. So yes. One is, how can we merge this approach with the growing interest in alcohol-free options?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't think that, I don't think that alcohol-free options are, free of criticism either. We need to be asking, like, how is your product made? Where is it made? What is the base for it? Because all these bottles come from something. They come from a grape. They come from some sort of raw ingredient. So asking those questions, asking the questions about the people that make them. And then, just like anything, kind of being critical about like the ingredients you use to build your cocktail around this non-alcoholic spirit. Or, a lot of people use teas and things like that. And tea is like a whole other rabbit hole of, where are these teas being sourced? Where are, who is handling the production of those teas? And there's a lot to be learned from, I think, like the fair trade coffee movement, even though it has its own problems. But that is a model that can be, definitely referenced when you're thinking about not using alcohol-specific products.
Got it. As kind of a layer on, and it was mentioned before, but what are your tips for menu design to signal sustainability without writing a novel? So how do you get that across in a simple way to a guest who's coming in? Yeah,
I think that's a great question because, again, I don't want to hit anybody over the head with it. But also, I think just in general, my approach has always been for things to be really simply worded on menus. And then when people get it, they're like surprised. I like to over deliver instead of underwhelm. And so I've never been a big fan of like the huge descriptions under cocktails or even in food. Or like, I don't need to know your homemade syrup and your farm to table, blah, blah, blah. So I personally keep my adjectives really low. And so but we also, again, use these like kind of interesting ingredients like sunflower seeds or fig leaf, or we do a lot of like pickling and fermenting here. And so that's meant to kind of cue people to ask those questions. I think even something kind of looking at it more abstract is like, what is your menu made of? I know that obviously that's a little bit of a tougher thing to navigate right now, since we're, at least in New York, not supposed to use single or reusable menus, and most people are going digital. But, I've seen menus printed on bamboo paper. And I mean, even all of our paper here is all made from sugarcane bagasse, even if it's just the printout shift notes and things like that. And like, thinking about the coasters you're using, or just all these little different things that you can kind of look in your space and identify the waste and start just being like, what could I use instead of that? And going from there.
Got it. Cool. Last one. I know you mentioned this, but how are you approaching sustainability in our new single-use COVID world? Prep gloves to go wear, etc. Any ideas on that? I know it's challenging.
It is challenging. It's hard in so many ways and painful. Again, like we went to all single use because I just didn't feel comfortable bringing our dishes back in our space personally. but I try to do my due diligence to make sure the materials I was using was suitable for our conditions. So this is something I also reference a lot in New York, which is very different than San Francisco. And San Francisco is kind of different from everywhere, but San Francisco has municipal composting, and in New York, we don't have that. It's not citywide. And so there's really not any commercial facilities or industrial size facilities to handle composting. There's community gardens and like little compost sites, but they're not meant to process stuff like greenware, like world-centric, like bioplastics and things like that. Those all have to go to a whole other facility that we don't have access to in New York. So what usually happens is you go to all these coffee shops and all these people doing to-go cocktails here, and they're using like world-centric bioplastic cups, and those get tossed in our recycling here in New York. And what happens is they actually end up contaminating our recycling systems and devaluing our recycling in New York. And I think you might have read, and over the last few years, like China stopped accepting our recyclable materials because because it was so contaminated and the value was so little. I'm not going to say that bioplastics are responsible for that, but they definitely contribute to it. So like just asking, like calling your local trash company, which I know is not something we ever thought we would do as bartenders or owners of restaurants, and like asking them like these questions and seeing what materials work best. I'll say as another pivot here, I mentioned that my dining room is now a retail store, or soon to be open retail store. And we made a point to stock it with things that kept carrying this message of sustainability. So whether it was spices that are grown organically, and like the women that farm them in India are paid really great wages, or if it's indigenous grown grains, or even I'm selling toilet paper now.
You're a little late. Imagine if you had that paper.
Plant paper that's tree-free, toxin-free toilet paper.
Nice.
So all of those things kind of keep building layers, even though it's COVID and even though we're struggling. Those are things that we're doing. And then I think a lot of people kind of pigeonhole sustainability as something you have to spend more money on, and oftentimes it does. Like solar panels cost a lot of money, but doing these little things that I've often talked about, like changing your light bulbs to LEDs and changing the faucet heads on your sink so that they're not dripping, but also that they are like, does the hand sink in your bathrooms need to run at 6 gallons per minute? All those things are very small, easy changes you can do tomorrow that cost a small investment, but ultimately save you a lot of money. And I think more now than ever in this pandemic, we all could use those little pennies and dimes that we can pull together from these things that we're ultimately saving money on, but we're also saving waste on, and helping lower our climate footprint.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, since we are on Tiki Tuesday Talks, let's make a tiki drink. I'm going to bring Aaron in. There he is. Let's throw this cocktail up. Claire, do you want to tell us about this cocktail before we get Aaron making it?
Yeah, so this is a twist. I think I've done several twists on this cocktail over the years, but when I got into sustainability, it was really because I was working in San Francisco and very focused on water. And I'm like obsessed with water. I think about it a lot. Even in living on an island right now, the beautiful Long Island, it's still something that's really top of mind. And I think people undervalue how much we have to think about it even here in New York. But so again, touching back on the idea that almonds are bad, I was like, what's my almond edge? What's the thing I'm going to use instead? And so I found sunflower seed, which is, sunflowers are drought resistant. They have deep roots that access nutrients below other plants. So they're not zapping nutrients from other plants that might need them. So they're good neighbors. They also serve lots of different uses. But most of our sunflowers that we buy for commercial or food use in the United States are sourced from Europe, and Europe is no GMO. So there's never been like a GMO industry or market for sunflower seed production. And they're low till. And so you don't need a lot of manufacturing equipment to harvest them. And they're really nice to look at. And so we ended up using them in our orgeat, but also we work with our kitchen. They use like the solids that we strain off to make granola here. And then we dehydrate the flowers and garnish it. So it's our way of working that flower component back into our drink.
Super cool. Super cool. Yeah, if anybody wants to make this drink, please do post it up. Well, let's kick it over to Aaron to see the build.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. I guess let me lower my camera so you can actually see it.
Nice.
There we go.
Bar's looking good lately.
Hey, man, you know, it's not getting used, so absolutely. All right, awesome. All right, so we're going to start off with our wonderful sunflower orgeat and include an ounce of that. It is a little thick. There we go. All right. And then second, we're going to add a half ounce of fresh lemon juice. Ounce and a half of our Cruzan aged dark rum. And then finally, the delicious De Kuyper triple sec and a half ounce of that. Now, Chelsea, it did say that you just wanted to build and dump this in the glass. Is there a reason why we're dumping as opposed to straining over new ice?
So one of the nice things about Tiki is that a lot of the drinks are built on crushed ice, and my programs are all built around crushed ice machines because they're actually closer to 90 to 95% water and energy efficient compared to cube machines. And, you'll hear like people call this dirty dumping or party pours is what I think the Nomad group calls. But one of my friends here in New York, she refers to it as what is it? Save and pour, I think. Pour and save. And so when you're pouring ice into straight from a tin instead of pouring it over new ice, you're using essentially half the ice and you're using half the water and electricity that you would normally use to make that cocktail, which really adds up. So we build all of our recipes around crushed ice here to be more water efficient, which is really dorky.
We talked yesterday. I did a session with some friends in Canada, and the caipirinha is dirty dumped or now party poured, which I like even more. So yeah, very cool.
All right, so we have our delicious cocktail here, garnished with some pansies, and you would be happy to know that I grabbed these pansies. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to grab some sunflower petals. But these pansies are actually grown in-house in my windowsill. So very sustainable and approachable.
Thank you. And you're also living my dream right now, which is bartending sitting down. Like that's all I want as I get older. I just wanna relax when I'm bartending.
It's amazing. I think we've had almost everybody has bartended sitting down who's been on our show, which is a really interesting dynamic.
I mean, Tiki is laid back, so there you go.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. We'll bring you back in a moment to say goodbye. But I want to get into our 5 questions. Hey, buddy.
Hey there. What's up?
How you doing? Thanks for being patient.
This is awesome. It's great.
Right on. All right. Are you ready for your 5 questions?
I hope they're not too scathing.
Oh yeah, real tough stuff. Real
Yeah.
tough stuff.
The surprise
first of
elements
all-
make me nervous.
How many Aloha shirts do you own?
Oh, is this one of the questions?
Yeah, this is it.
Oh.
This is question number one.
I'm a poser. I got all my summer-esque button-up shirts from Bonobos.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm just, whatever. So I'm gonna say 4, and I reuse
4.
them very frequently.
Yeah. You look good in them. We got a photo here of you in one.
Oh
but
yeah, that's my one.
Yeah.
My one that I
There it is.
overuse.
There it is. Well, it's
You
a good
look
one.
great.
You look great. Actually,
Thank
I think one of my old roommates worked for Bonobos. Funny enough.
Can you hook me up with a deal?
Possibly remind me?
Their
Sounds like a
sales
good one.
are pretty fire, but a sale on a sale would be even better.
There you go. All right. Favorite Tiki by the Sea memory?
Oh man, this is gonna go very. You know what? 2. All right. Riding on a
sure.
boat, seeing dolphins. That's pretty. That was an extraordinary experience. I'd never, with all due respect, never looked at New Jersey under that light before.
Most people are based in New Jersey in their
I
experience.
mean, you look up like top 10 TripAdvisor things to do in New Jersey, and number 1 is look at the Manhattan skyline. And so that's been my unfortunate perception of most New Jersey.
Right.
But yeah, like sailing on a cruise, or like that yacht ship thing that we're on, seeing a bunch of dolphins, a school of dolphins just kind of circling around. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Getting second place in the Tiki garnish throwdown.
Yeah.
Kind of goes against our sustainability talk a little bit, but just think a little bit, trial by fire, serving a drink in a big eggplant. That was pretty fun. To tack on a bonus third there, like meeting some people that I still keep in touch with to this day. Some really awesome industry professionals. That was such a fun time.
Very cool. Glad to hear it. All right. Weirdest thing you saw in Wildwood? Weirdest.
I guess I just everything was written in that Rocco's Modern Life font. Which really spoke to me in my childhood. I felt like, where's this place been all my life? That I don't know why that was the weirdest thing. Like, you had hotels shaped like volcanoes. You had, again, New Jersey under a whole different light that I was used to. But yeah, the font and typography decisions were just honestly one of my biggest takeaways.
That's a good point. I mean, there is a range of fonts that is hard to find anywhere else, basically.
Yeah, only Wildwood.
Only Wildwood. Yeah, that's funny. All right. Favorite Tiki by the Sea memory? Oh, we did that one. Hold on. Favorite meal in Wildwood? Favorite meal?
Favorite meal? We had that big old pig roast at very, very tail end at that one restaurant. That was extraordinary. I mean, you roast a whole pig, and if you eat meat, how can you not have fun? It was lovely.
Right on. Tell us about Yaki Tiki.
Oh yeah. Amidst all these reopenings, so Yaki Tiki is sort of, well, let me back up. So we opened up a restaurant called Rule of Thirds. It's a Japanese izakaya-inspired Brooklyn restaurant. And the bar program basically tries to play with some umami flavors as well as Japanese spirits and sakes and shochus. And we've been very fortunate to be packed and busy like every night to where we can't really accommodate very many walk-ins. And so our sidewalk, we've put out this kind of real casual, fun, tented experience called Yaki Tiki, where it's more the small, Binchotan skewer portion of the dinner menu, along with some Japanese-inspired and Tiki-inspired cocktails that are very, loudly garnished and fun. And it's a rotating menu of 4 different cocktails. So again, we try to channel that same ideology of, taking tiki or American classic cocktails that are more on the tropical side, but giving them a Japanese accent in a way. And so, yeah, it's just kind of our way to accommodate walk-ins, but almost like our alter ego, more casual, fun experience where you kind of let your hair down and, just sit on these sake crates that are brightly colored and kind of just jam out to some tunes and have some really delicious tropical cocktails. So that's kind of Yaki Tiki in a nutshell,
Awesome.
like a paragraph long nutshell.
Yeah, very cool. Look forward to experiencing it someday when I can make it back over there. But you're doing really cool things. Had an interesting conversation the other day with Chalky about the who does work with Ming River and like the evolution of Tiki as like it's only been this one thing, and it's really uninteresting to make it only this one thing, and how access to all these different amazing flavors and cocktail traditions and ingredients makes it way more fucking interesting.
Oh yeah.
And I think you're totally going down that avenue with this. So super cool.
Thank you. Yeah. She's definitely correct. And, Baijiu itself, it's a very funky, sometimes off-putting spirit to some people, but like when blended in with rums or mezcal, like it kind of gives a whole nother element, and you can fit that within that more tropical framework.
Awesome. Very cool. Steve, anything else? What'd I miss?
I don't think you missed anything. I'm ready for Yaki Tiki though. Take me there.
We'll show you a good time.
He sold it.
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, awesome. I missed one thing. I gotta remind everybody, just contact info for Claire. I'll add her back in also. So IG at Claire Sprouse, sprouse.claire@gmail. Reminder on tip jar, Venmo at HunkyDoryBK if you are so predisposed. But yeah, and then as another reminder, next week we're super excited. We have Gunnar Gislason, chef and owner of Dylan Iceland, Michelin star chef, also handled Agern in New York, talking about building the plate. Culinary philosophy plays into building a spirit. So that's going to be an aquavit and culinary session. Super stoked to have him. So we'll put everybody back. Hi, guys. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Really informative.
Thank you, Claire.
Sustainability Funhouse.
Yay!
Thank you.